I can't help it. Whenever I read this parsha, I think of Bugs Bunny. Does anyone not know who Bugs Bunny is? Very Jewish character. I'll come back to that. And why Bugs Bunny is my favorite Jewish character, and why he should be your favorite cartoon character as well. And by the way, that's going to be a requirement going forward. Just thought you should know ahead of time. So I do have a question to start with, which is, if we were traditional, whatever the definition of that word means, if we were going to be traditional, what was, and I've asked this question before in other venues, what was the holiest moment in history, if we're traditional? Receiving the Torah. Why? So does a good self-help book. Was given by God. It's direct revelation. The tradition teaches that when God gave the Torah on Mount Sinai, it was direct revelation to everyone. And so from that moment forward, the holiness of our experiences has lessened because it is farther and farther away from the direct divine revelation. And that's important. So if we go back into the text, then I'm on chapter 1 and probably verse 34 if you want to follow me. If not, you don't have to. I'm going to read parts of it. Moses is recounting to the Israelites all of the mistakes that they've made as Israelites. You didn't want to do this, you didn't want to do this, you didn't want to do this. And then the Lord heard your loud complaint, and God was angry. And God vowed, not one of you of this evil generation shall see the good land that I swore to give to your ancestors, except for Kalev ben Yefuneh and Yehoshua ben Nun. And then in verse 37, he continues, and because of you, Moses talking to the Israelites, because of you, I'm going to point to you, you be the Israelites, I'll be Moses, okay? Because of you, the Lord was incensed with me. By the way, I'm not exactly sure that's how Moses said it, but it really sounds better. And Moses said, and God said, you shall not enter it either, Mo. Joshua the son of Nun, who attends you, he shall enter it. And what's wrong with that phrase? Does anyone know? Why wasn't Moses allowed to enter the land of Israel?
It's not because of that. He didn't listen to God.
Have you read this text? There's another text, yeah.
Well, it said previously that because he hit the rock rather than speaking to it.
Right. There are two texts that follow fairly close. And in both texts, the Israelites need water. In the first one, Moses hits the rock and they get the water. But in the second text, God specifically says to Moses, talk to the rock. And there are a lot of jokes about that, by the way. But talk to the rock and water will come out. Moses gets angry, accuses the Israelites of being rebels, and hits the rock. And then God says to Moses, because you failed to sanctify my name into the Israelites, you're not going in. But in the book of Deuteronomy, which our parsha this week, Moses says, it's your fault that I'm not going into the promised land. Now, to put it in context, the Israelites have been in the wilderness for almost 40 years. They're about to enter the land of Israel. The generation that left Egypt is dead. This is their children and grandchildren. And Moses is talking to them and recounting the history of the Israelites. And it is likely that no one except for Kalev and Joshua, who are part of Moses' entourage, have a real knowledge of what really happened. So the question I ask you is the tough question that we ask, which is, why is Moses lying?
I don't think
How about if we just, let's compromise. He was prevaricating. He was prevaricating.
I don't know what it is.
It means to lie. But it's got lots of consonants. He's lying.
But it's like parents sometimes say, to the children, because of you I did that, because
Ah.
you made me angry.
So Moses wants to guilt out the Israelites.
He's giving away his own power. He's saying that because of your actions, I couldn't do mine the way I was supposed to because I was so angry at you. He
So,
responsibility and became the victim as opposed to owning his own actions for what they were.
that's really nice. Can I make it worse? I'm going to reframe it.
Another word for lying?
Prevaricating, right. So I'm going to reframe it. In other words, Moses is throwing a guilt trip on the Israelites and saying, it wasn't my fault. Moses refuses to own his actions. The fact that, I'm sorry? No, it sounded good. What? Right, okay. Moses is refusing to own, but he's refusing to own up to it. All he had to say was, look, you got me angry, but I'm the one who actually hit the rock. What Moses is saying is, it's your fault that I'm not going in. That might not be projection, but it certainly isn't the truth.
He's just blaming them because he's upset, like that he messed up, but he wants to blame them.
Right, he's throwing the blame off on them. It's not my fault that I'm not going in. Again, so
He can't blame God for this because he's already in trouble with God, so.
well, why can't he blame God? No, that's a great answer. Why can't he blame God?
And why can't
You know,
he ask
you're into medieval Jewish philosophy. You're really into heavy Maimonides' Guide to the Perplexed right now. I should,
Right, what can I do?
yeah.
I don't, he can't.
Right, he can't.
The only reason that, bring it way down, people who are being supported by those above them, who cannot blame those above them directly, they take whatever that resentment is and do it down to their children. Because he can't.
You know, that reminds me that one of the things I told I have 3 daughters, and I always told them, some of you know this, I always tell them that by the time you realize how badly we have done and you need therapy, you're on your own medical plan. So, I'm sorry, the cantor one, you were,
why can't he ask God for forgiveness too? I mean,
yeah, why can't he ask God for forgiveness?
it's like I messed up, like, okay, but let me in, please.
Now, by the way, yeah,
So mine is related to what the cantor said. He argued with God to save the people of Israel after the golden calf so that he didn't smite everybody. Why couldn't he argue on his own behalf?
right, now, we're dealing with, yeah,
But he does argue on his own behalf, but he
in the next
doesn't ask for
parsha,
forgiveness.
right,
He says, "Could
Please."
you change your decree?" He doesn't say,
Right.
"I was guilty, and please ask for forgiveness." So he doesn't.
And that's actually in the first verses of the next parsha, V'yatchanan, which means, and I entreated God. Now, we are dealing with pshat. Pshat is the not simple, but it is the plain meaning of the text. We are only dealing with the pshat. There's something called midrash, which most of us are much more familiar with, even though we don't call it that. And the midrash is like Jeopardy. In other words, when you read a midrash, you have to figure out what was the question that was being asked. So the midrash that answers that question is Moses does entreat God and says, what do I need to do to get into the Holy Land? And the midrash comes and says, well, God says, I can take you there, but I have to take away all of your knowledge, your Torah knowledge. So Moses then is projected. Rod Serling comes out, and the Twilight Zone anthem comes on, and Moses is projected there, and he's sitting in the yeshiva just don't shoot the messenger. So he's sitting in the yeshiva of Joshua, and they're asking Joshua all these questions, and Moses doesn't know any of the answers, and Moses turns to God and says, no, I'd rather die. Okay, and so the question is, why does the Midrash go there? And the answer is because why didn't Moses beg? Now, one of my teachers was David Hartman, and David Hartman, he's passed away, but very, very well known as a Pshat commentator and a Maimonidean scholar. And one of his basic teachings is that we ask the hard questions, but we never follow up the questions with the obvious answers. So there's another possibility. Moses is 120 years old. Maybe he's lost it. More than that, it's not only that he doesn't want to do it anymore, he has lost it. That he has recreated the narrative. Now, think about that for a second. Now, by the way, David Hartman was an Orthodox scholar, which is one of the reasons why the Orthodox didn't think he was Orthodox. And maybe Moses, at 120 years old, after ushering the Israelites for 40 years, just doesn't want to do it anymore, can't do it anymore, and is losing his faculties. Maybe he really doesn't remember. Or maybe he has created a new narrative, as many of us do when we don't want to face some things that are very hard to deal with. We recreate the narrative so that we become the victim or that we become the innocent. There's a problem with that, which is the tradition cannot handle that type of question. And the reason the tradition can't handle that type of question is because the holiest moment in the tradition is when God has direct revelation on Mount Sinai. And the holiest person is the person to whom that revelation came to first. So Moses cannot have we cannot criticize Moses, because that ultimately suggests that the revelation at Sinai, whatever it was, is not necessarily the holiest moment. Now, one of the big differences between conservative, reform, reconstructionist Judaism and traditional Judaism is that in traditional Judaism, we have been getting less holy since Sinai. But in the more liberal movements, we have been becoming more knowledgeable and more sophisticated since Sinai. It is a bedrock of our movement that we have a better understanding of what the tradition is, which allows us to change the tradition when necessary. But it means that we have to look at the text in a different way, unless looking at Moses as a human being, a true human being, is very painful, which is why Bugs Bunny is my favorite cartoon. Because if you know anything about Bugs Bunny, you know it's a cartoon on many different levels. It's a cartoon that was specifically designed for both parents and children to watch and enjoy. It is a subversive cartoon with a tremendous amount of sarcasm and farce for the adult and a lot of slapstick for the child. Judaism has many different layers, and if you are not comfortable with Moses being anything but perfect, then you have the text and Midrash in front of you. But if Moses not being perfect allows us to look at our patriarchs, and as I've said before, look at them as human beings, and look at how much they accomplished, even though they had the foibles that we ourselves have, and by extension, we can accomplish great things because we are no different than they are. We are human. Then it allows us to view the tradition with optimism, that each person who is born has the ability to bring on the Messianic era, which, by the way, is the metaphor that is used at every baby naming and bris when you have a chair for Elijah. Elijah is the herald of the Messiah, and we bring Elijah in for many different reasons. But one of the traditional reasons is that we believe that every child born has the potential to bring in the Messianic era. And so when you believe that, it allows us to look at Moses and Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah as human beings who were able to rise to their potential, even as flawed individuals. As we come into the high holiday season, I find great comfort in that, because even though I am human and make mistakes, and some of them are doozies, I have the potential to rise above that and become great, as each of us does.